Is it true you are what you wear? Since humans see first and speak second, how much do we judge each other by what we wear? Who is like us? Who's our in-group? Who's in our out-group? But aren't we also curious about what people wear? In our talk, Wearing a Cultural Identity, Garments of Difference, Michael and I will take you on a cultural journey to rethink what we know about the garments we wear. And speaking of such, you're looking very dapper today, Michael.
Thanks, Anita.
It's lovely. It's like tie-dye.
Yes, in Nigeria it's called adire. That's from the Yoruba-speaking part of Nigeria. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Through our gradual human evolution, we have worn garments largely dictated by the climatic and geographic contexts which we inhabited, be them tropical, temperate, arid, or frigid, to protect us from the elements, obviously. The conditions in which we work also influence our choices, making certain clothes more practical, of course. Hunting and then agriculture was our work long before large-scale industrial manufacturing or services like we do today. Available resources like cotton, silk, wool, linen, leather, and fur have become our second skin, if you will. Take the dhoti from India. This woven cotton garment makes work on the land practical, obviously, a fabric that was easily woven by spinning looms of the time. But it's no surprise then that when Gandhi switched from his lawyer's suit to the dhoti, this garment had a political context to mobilize Indians against British colonialism. But depending on what the dhoti was woven from, say silk, this also demarcated a sense of privilege or cultural status when worn as a leader or in cultural festivities. Through elaboration, of course, on the garment.
In the era of great empires covering large geographical territories, cross-cultural influence through trade was fluid. Merchants who spoke up to 5 or 6 languages inevitably influenced cultural variations in the use of fabrics, colors, and beading with local garments. Take the Silk Route, for example. The term pants, that derived from a traditional character in 16th century Italian comedy, the pantaloon, was also a staple garment worn in Central Asia. So when we wear pants in North America, we're not actually wearing a garment that we think is our own, but actually has its origin in Central Asia.
I never knew that.
And what of garments in cold climates? Fur and leather remain a cultural inheritance today. Why do the Russians and northern cultures still prefer fur? What of the indigenous use of leather and fur? With mass manufacturing of garments, we've seen the displacement of indigenous traditional garments to those of cultural identity markers, which also represents a reclaiming of indigenous cultural heritage today. But as culture evolves, we have also seen how fur and leather garments were subject to judgment in the 20th century with the advent of animal rights activists against the fur trade.
Yes. And speaking of fur, I think of kings when I think of fur, where all that fur went from this land to Europe. But as the people of France overthrew Louis XVI, the aristocratic garments of those sun gods used once to wield power over the masses after the French Revolution of 1789 were no more. With the birth of the French Republic came a burgeoning bureaucracy to handle matters of the state. In Britain, George Brian Brummel, or Beau as they called him, was a dandy of Regency England. And he fashioned the way men wore what has come to be our standard suit, a less ornate and more rational garment. The poet and flaneur, Charles Baudelaire, as he wandered around the streets, was distraught by a rapidly Brummelized society of black and gray, declaring the new fashion a symbol of mourning for a world that had lost its potential for beauty. Civil servants, men, and later women adopted the suit, of course, especially in the 1980s for women, bringing with it a kind of conformity. And what of the working class? Well, blue jeans made from dungaree or dongri, a coarse calico actually found in 16th century Mumbai, India, became the work clothes kind of uniform of the late 19th century, a textile and garment that was durable and was once even produced for and worn by gold miners digging for gold in blue jeans. With the invention of oil paint in Europe, on the other hand, after the Renaissance, and together with European conquests and colonization, artists, of course, traveled as well to unfamiliar geographies. Take Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, for example. He had a fascination with the Ottoman Empire. This painting, Odalisque with Slave of 1839, is a painting of the Topkapi Palace harem in Istanbul. In Europe, his paintings created a sensation, but they also created a certain perception of women in the Orient as leisure subjects, enslaved in the harem by their men. But this is gross and unjust, Michael. An unjust construction, to say the least. Women had some power in the Ottoman Empire, and they were also involved in trade and owned property. So Ingres misleads us, because you know why? He would have never had the chance to even get in the harem in the first place, making his paintings a depiction of the European male fantasy, or of what he assumed the harem to be. But did these depictions of women and men of the Orient taint our view of women from the Middle Eastern nations today, for example? When coupled with Islamophobia post-2001 following 9/11, are women in the Middle East still assumed to be oppressed, helpless victims to their dominant, violent men who they have to be saved by someone, Michael, right?
Yeah. And what of our perception of other religions and garments? Specific garments demarcated religious leaders from the rest of the people, indicating who was a priest, a rabbi, or imam. The three great religions that converge. But how might climate, geography, religion, and garments intersect in ways we perhaps haven't thought of? Take the birth of Islam and the political context around Mecca, an arid desert. Arab tribal dress was typical of the region. If you've ever been to the Sahara and felt the sun's wrath on the body, you know well you don't uncover.
You cover up.
Exactly,
Yeah.
you cover up. Your body rapidly dehydrates. Might it have been human inclination to link the Muslim faith with Arab tribal dress to indicate one's conversion to Islam? As academic Emma Tallow in her book Visibly Muslim suggests, and I quote her, "There is no such thing as a clear-cut category of Muslim dress. Muslims around the world wear a huge range of different garments, many of which relate more to local regional traditions than religious ideas, and some of which are not particularly associated with either." End of quote, Anita.
Yeah, interesting. I never thought of it that way. And what of colonialism then? Christianity, through colonization, introduced European dress that erased many of the local garments. Take Latin America, for example. The Inca of the Andes of Ecuador have largely adopted the fedora hat and Spanish skirt to be their own, when in fact, these garments were introduced by Spanish colonizers. The interesting thing about those garments, though, is, Michael, they're all layered. And in a way that makes sense because the climate changes almost each moment of the day. Because they're on the equator, morning, noon, and evening, it's hot, cold, rainy, sunny, all in one day. So it kind of makes sense to have layers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of my experience here in Canada.
Yeah.
So I've lived the 4 seasons. So I kind of know what to wear for each season. And
well, you're brave coming out today on such a cold day, Michael, in this beautiful outfit.
Yeah, and so I have like compartments in my house where I have like summer clothes and fall clothes and clothes for spring. And that's pretty exciting because back home in Africa, we don't exactly have that. So we would have the same set of clothes we wear all through the year.
Good way to build your wardrobe.
Exactly.
But I know you've got a wardrobe full of clothes in Nigeria anyway.
Because of
Yeah.
the system of indirect rule introduced by the British in parts of Africa, including Nigeria, many of the traditional institutions and indigenous governments were allowed to coexist alongside governance structures created by the colonizers. Chiefs and traditional authorities did not have to trade their local garments for those worn by foreigners, even though elements of European clothing and accessories were incorporated into their dressing. Bowler hats, top hats, boaters, Panama hats, and even cowboy hats
Even cowboy
were
hats.
combined with etibos, wrappers, and other traditional outfits. And even today, those combinations still exist. From about the year 2000, these hats worn by predominantly men from South of Nigeria, or what is best known as the Niger Delta region of Nigeria, became synonymous with the struggle for resource control. When they became popularized by political leaders from the region, like the former president, Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, and a one-time governor of Bayelsa State, DSP Alamesera. Their outfits became the symbol of the struggle for resource control.
The
Anita.
hat. So if you ask me, Michael, what changes to garment wearing happened in my region, namely Turkey, I have to go back a little bit. With the fall of four empires, German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman, that began with World War I, Turkey, rather than becoming colonized, expelled British, French, Italian, and Greek colonizers and formed the independent secular Republic of Turkey. Following 1923, they became an industrial might, or started working to be an industrial might in and for themselves. Garments followed contemporary European and American fashions of the time. But neighboring countries in the Middle East who attempted a kind of similar cultural revolution were perhaps partially successful. Since American consumerist culture began at the turn of the 20th century and continues really today, there is virtually no nation or local dress that hasn't somehow been influenced or affected, especially by Western global brand conformity. So why is it today we see a resurgence of wearing of religious identity as cultural markers, as you said? Once garments for religious leaders, I thought. As you suggest, Michael, there might be a wave of reclaiming culture through what we wear. But how do cultures decide what to claim? Is reclaiming fashionable or individualistic or following a faith or trying to stand out from the crowd or a response to geopolitical aggression? Do political leaders help influence the reclaiming of culture? And if so, why? What if someone is forced to wear a religious garment under a theocracy, for example, or even forced not to wear a religious garment like the hijab in Quebec, for example? Wouldn't this seem strange, especially with the launch of the Tommy Hilfiger hijab in 2020, or the burkini that Halima Aden wore for the cover of Sports Illustrated in 2019? And why is it acceptable to wear a mask with a burqa and not a regular burqa that gives the same outward image? There's so much to learn, Michael. It's the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Yeah, we can go on and on about
We could.
garments and
Yeah.
clothing and their cultural implications. So for sure there is. Something else to point out is that much of what is worn in Africa isn't garment for garment's sake. Through their clothes and styling, young Nigerians are making a statement. It is the resurgence and modernization of what their parents wore in the 40s and 50s before bureaucracy and corporate Africa made it almost mandatory for people to wear only European-style clothing to work and other formal occasions. The transition of the Agbada is the case in point. Agbada is a rich, long flowing robe favored by the political class in the period just before and after Nigeria became independent in 1960. And they have their origins in Western Nigeria, what you would know as Yoruba. Today, they come in new and exciting designs worn by pretty much everyone to show pride in their cultural identity and to maybe assert their individuality as well.
Yeah, you've shown me some of them. They're just wonderful, Michael. I love them, yeah. So thanks, Michael, for sharing your thoughts today. It's been really an illuminating talk, don't you think? So all of you out there listening, from now on, be curious about what people wear, but not in a negative way. Try to think of it as in a positive way, because you know, you might never really want to judge people just based on something that they wear, although I know it's a horrible habit and we do it. So thank you anyway for listening. Think about what you wear, what you are, and what you're wearing right now.